Okay. Today, I would like to talk about uh, Okazaki Goro Masamune Nyudo. So let me unpack that name. Masamune is the family name. Nyudo means like a lay priest. So many people during this time period uh, would also, if they were in specifically religious or practitioners of Buddhism, they would become Nyudo, which is kind of lay priest. And so many emperor, many shogun or warlord, they also became Nyudo uh, based on their practice and study. Uh, Masamune is quite a famous name. Have you heard this name before? You have, right? Is it anime? Or video games, anime and video games. Okay, yeah. So now you get to understand the real part of that part, where that all came from, and why that is in the video game. So there's a couple different people named Masamune. There's a person called Date Masamune who was a kind of shogun. He is famous, but this is a famous because of the sword maker. The sword maker is just as important as the sword uh, uh, user, but most people don't think about that. When we think about swords, we think about, like for instance, in the West, something that we use just to hit people and to kill people and that. But in the East has a different kind of idea because of Eastern tradition. So when people make the sword, the nature of the maker goes inside the sword. Also, the sword is seen as a spiritual item, not necessarily just for killing. So swords are used for also purification or protection rather than the idea of killing necessarily. That's just one aspect of it. And also, if you've ever seen the process of them making the sword, it can take up 6 months to a year to make a single sword. Also, the amount of cost invested in that and time is quite extensive, and learning too. So Master Masamune, to become a great swordsmith, he had to also go through this study and learning. And that's where actually the story begins. So Masamune was born around, and again, in this time period, around means that they were not specific about birth. So we generalized born around 1264. The founder of this tradition, Nichiren Shonin, was born in 1222. So around the same period. This period of Japan, if you think about it, was actually a period of instability. So lots of warlords fighting against each other. Also, for the people like ourselves, the regular class, the people were starving, lots of pestilence and illness, as well as the not being able to be peaceful because of all the wars going on and them getting caught in the middle, which is usually how wars go, right? So, in the basis of this story, this name Masamune was actually given to him by our founder of our tradition, Nichiren Shonin. And this happened because his master, which would have been his sword master, some people say his father, might have been the same person, brought him to meet Nichiren Shonin. And Nichiren Shonin was a very famous priest from the 13th century, quite different than most priests you would imagine, because he specified to actually against the Buddhist, how would you say, Buddhist organization. Like Buddhism at that time, like many other traditions, had become very much enmeshed with the political and also the government. And he totally denounced that. And also the idea of regular people being able to practice Buddhism, because Buddhism at that time was also something that was kept, most Buddhist traditions, and there are many styles of Buddhism, were kept amongst the very elite. So Nichiren Shonin, he talked to people on the street rather than in the temple. So he's considered one of these kind of rebel priests, if you would think about it that way. And also irritated the social establishment, etc. So he told the government, your purpose is to take care of the people, but you don't do that. You fight and take all the money and all of those things. So he was also social justice in that way, fighting for people's rights, etc., and humanity. And so this meeting happened when his master attended to one of Nichiren Shonin's lectures. And Nichiren Shonin met him and gave him the name Masamune. And Masamune's story is very interesting because Masamune there are two very famous people, which I have found out both of them were Nichiren Buddhist, part of our tradition. One is Masamune and Muramasa. Do you know the story of this one with the two different styles of sword? So you might have heard it in some movies. I think they talk about the Muramasa sword is considered the bloodthirsty sword. So that sword is usually quite vicious. So when you say that, it has a nature to it. So its purpose is to kill. So once people take out, it loves to taste, it has to have a taste of blood type thing. So this story came about because they were two very famous swordsmiths. And one story said they got into the challenge each other. Muramasa had a very hot temper. And so he challenged Masamune to the fight. Or they were testing to see which sword is the most, elite of them. So therefore, how do they test it? A long time ago, they used to test, if you look at some swords, I think they would test on prisoners. So they would tie up the prisoners and see how many prisoners they could cut through with the sword. Then they mark it on the handle. But in this tradition, in this situation, they used the sword, they stuck it in the pond, in the kind of stream. And some people say they hung it from something above the stream. But the idea is that this is in the water. And what had happened was Muramasa's sword, everything that came in contact with fish, frogs, everything, it cut immediately in half just by touching it. These swords are that much. I have a scar to prove that. Just letting your finger it come out and just a finger sat on it and sink on it like that. And I didn't even know until I looked down. So that's how sharp they are. So it cut everything, right? Then everyone thought, wow, that's an amazing sword. It can cut through anything. And then they put the Masamune's sword into the water. And all of the fish and everything didn't get cut in half, it went around it. But all the leaves that were coming down immediately slit in half. And it was interesting because the Muramasa thought his sword was superior because it cut everything. And that Masamune's only cut these leaves that were coming down the stream. But actually, one monk who was to decide who won said, actually, you misunderstand. Your sword is just killing item, just an instrument of death, just perfect in killing. But Masamune's sword never take life. It only cut the inanimate thing or non-sentient thing in half, not a living thing. Living thing went around, it didn't harm living thing. So actually Masamune's sword was considered superior at that point. And also you see there are probably many movies where people seek out the Muramasa sword because it's such an evil, like it's considered an evil sword. So some people will not purchase it. So some people consider it an evil sword. So people think it comes with bad karma or bad attachment to it. So actually, some people seek it out very much, and some people avoid it like the plague. But both of them, actually, I found out were believers in Nichiren Buddhism, but just two different characters. And so, also one of the most famous swords that you may not have heard of is called the Honjo Masamune sword. This sword was the most sought after sword by daimyo or shogun or leaders. And actually it was all the way up to the Tokugawa family. So in World War II, Tokugawa was one of the reigning family shogun before. They were no longer, the emperor was in place. But when the American World War II, our side went to Japan, they made an act to reclaim all of the swords. And actually the Tokugawa brought all of the swords to the station for the army to show that they were not in war with the America. That was the last time it was seen. So it is one of the most sought after swords still that is lost. Nichiren Shonin, he also had a Masamune sword, which is very famous because he actually, these are juzu. It's called the juzu sword. So in his hut, he would wrap the handle with his specific juzu, which then it became a symbol of protection. And that sword was also very highly prized by people. The interesting thing, if you look at the sword, there is a hamon, which is kind of the cutting blade. It has all different designs. Masamune's hamon, that's called ha, means like cutting blade. Mon is a kind of piece, is like a wave style. So there are many different styles of this kind of hamon. His is most famous for this wave style that he created. This is very difficult to make because it depends how you make the actual clay that goes on it and how you temper it, etc., that it makes this beautiful kind of wave design on the hamon. And also his swords were quite superior for his time period because they were much more durable and much more stronger, that they wouldn't break so easy. And that is, of course, based on the metal, how they put it together, etc., and make the sword, pound the sword out. So actually, within Nichiren Buddhism now, Masamune's lineage still continues. And actually, the next in line is actually a Nichiren Shu priest, like myself. And his father is the head of Masamune in Kamakura, Japan. And also the gravesite is there in Kamakura, which used to be the capital of Japan in the ancient times, during the Bakufu times, the time of the shogun. And actually, the most famous place there is where Nichiren Shonin, the founder of our tradition, actually taught in the street. So I was just there in November. So it's very nice to go see Masamune, Goro Masamune, and pay respects to his grave site there in the old capital. So today, because he is such a important figure, that this idea of the sword, based on our teaching of the Lotus Sutra, is that we are life-giving practice. So therefore, our life, like the sword, is to give and support life, and therefore be able to protect life as well. So that is why this nature of Masamune's sword is a very important part of our history of Nichiren Buddhism. Also, it's important to know, if you look at most traditions, usually the idea of warriors and weapons, etc., religion is separate, right? Usually that's evil. But actually, in the Eastern sense, that is actually a sort of life or of death. Same with ourselves. We live our life for the support and happiness of this world and benefit others, or we live selfishly by ourselves and take away from others. That is a two aspects of life we have. So therefore, we have a choice how we grow our life, how we maintain our life, the same as the Masamune blade. Right? So thank you very much.